going on, everybody? It's your pal Spaz Phoenix, and you don't see my pretty sexy face, so you know I'm not alone. We're doing NXT stuff. We got Jake DeMarco in the house. What's up, brother?
Hey, what's going on, Spaz? Thank you so much for having me back yet again. Happy to be here. Now that we've got our audio issues squared away, everybody sounds sexy as ever. I'm ready to talk about the best women's division there is in NXT.
I was going to say, I'm not talking to you from across your room anymore. So
that's not using a string and a can.
Oh, my God. Actually, you know what? String in a can, send me some SOSs from south of the border. Could be understandable this week.
Kids today, they don't know the joy of a string in a can, I'm telling you.
We were just talking about Velveteen Dream before we started this, and now we're talking about strings and cans and kids. So that's going away. We're not even doing a problematic podcast this time.
No.
And even though we're talking about the women's division, Sasha Banks isn't in NXT anymore, so it's good. But yeah, you sort of hit the nail right on the head. Favorite thing about NXT, bar none, like the reason why it doesn't really matter they have a men's title right now is because their women's division is knocking it out of the park. We've been saying for a couple of weeks now that we were going to get in there and do a deep dive on the women's division, and then they sort of stuck Halloween Havoc in the middle there, so we had something else to talk about first. But
yeah, thankfully, because it ended up being a great show.
And heads and tails by the women's division. You had the Battle of the Monsters in there, and you had the title match at the end. You had my girl Shotzi, who we're going to talk about in a later video as the host. Like, just look at that show up and down. If you want a great example of why me and you and anybody that does put a focus on NXT is spending a good 75% of their time, fair to say, talking about the women's division.
Yeah, and Sports Illustrated put out an article, I think it was back in June, where they went ahead and, Justin Barrasso was talking about how, the NXT Women's Championship is one of wrestling's top titles. And he uses a quote from Triple H that says, NXT is a place where people come when they have something to prove, and that's been embedded in the women's division since its creation. And he's absolutely right. There's no shortage of championships in professional wrestling. We've known that. But nothing feels as important right now as the women's title does in NXT. And they've done that by having consistent, solid feuds and excellent matches. Great stories, and they've not muddied the waters with any BS, thankfully, so far.
And it really does. It's not just a thing that supports itself. And I'm sure there's some sexist assholes out there that are like, oh, we're just doing the toting the SJW feminist thing. And anybody that's listened to this podcast for any length of time knows that feminist and SJW are not tags that I typically wear. But because of the strength of this division, and we could, I should say it right off the bat for the AEW fans out there, yes, this is a mirror image of the conversation we would have if we were talking about AEW and their tag team division. And you can do all kinds of funky other things if you have one strong division to build on. And I'm going to say the same thing about NXT, because NXT is not without its flaws. The main men's title has been cursed recently. If you look at all
vacated far too many times due to injury and issues, absolutely.
Well, Keith Lee left, so he's dying on Raw. Karrion Kross fucked up his shoulder. Finn Balor fucked up his jaw, and what was it? Kyle O'Reilly bruised his liver, I believe.
Roughed himself up good as well. So,
but they're not, and part of this also has to do with the fact that they're not playing super counter to AEW right now, which is also a great thing. But they're not in a super rush to fix it this time. Like, we didn't get 25 triple threat matches to crown a brand new champion right away. They just sort of left it and they shelved it, and we talked about the idea of shelving the title until one of those guys comes back. The tag team division in NXT is relatively non-existent right now. North American title is pretty strong. They just put it on Johnny Gargano, and the Cruiserweight title. Yeah. The Cruiserweight title, while they've been having great matches and great stuff, you and I pulled forever for it to even get onto a takeover.
Yes.
And that finally happened, and it was great with Swerve and Escobar, and then moving on to, I think Jordan Devlin is actually back in action over in the UK, so that could be something. But yes, while all those other titles are sort of treading water, the one thing that never lets you down on NXT is the women's division, especially with the deep pool they have right now. And because of that, and because of our more so, you've got your fingers in a lot of pies, so you got to do a little bit with me, and then you got to go over with Joe. We've actually spread this topic out over the next 3 pods that we're going to do.
Yeah,
breaking down the women's division.
Way to break it down and kind of, save the best for last, but cover each piece and segment. And one of the things eventually, too, I want to pick your brain about is if you saw the main event from NXT UK, obviously Walter taking on Dragunov was, I think, one of the most violent matches I've ever seen without the use of weapons.
Everybody's been saying that, and I've seen a lot of people breaking it down, even What Culture, who usually make fun of the brand, which is funny because it's in their neck of the woods.
Yeah,
they've done pods on it, despite the fact that they don't usually cover the brand at all. I haven't seen it yet, if I'm perfectly honest with you. I was going to.
Chance yet. I cannot recommend it enough. When you do see it, then we can go ahead and break that down. But
oh yeah, for sure.
I'm telling you, honestly, that's the best way for me to put it. One of the most intense and violent matches that I've seen without the use of any weapons.
That's
the way they handled the referee in NXT UK, whoever is refereeing each match, because there's no fans really. Like there's a very slight few that you can hear around their arena, but point is,
the reaction comes from the ref.
Yes, so the action and reactions come from the referee, and the way that they were able to have them control the flow of the match, you'll see when you watch it. It was a very unique role for a referee, because the referee actually felt domineering and threatening in a sense, like, hey, if you don't listen to me, this is, and they actually abided by the ref's rules at times. Like, the ref felt like a real official for once in this match. So,
but from what I hear, they also felt like a real human being, like having actual reactions to it. Like, obviously, you have to play that balance between being a professional, doing your professional role, kayfabe wise, and being an actual human being. And as we all know, in real life, the referee is there to be a communicator between the back and the wrestlers as well. So now the guy's pulling 3 roles. Now
AEW just added finally the ability for them to talk to gorilla position this weekend.
Oh, AEW. Oh, were they not doing that before? I didn't even.
They were not.
Notice.
No, Tony Khan just announced that they added that as an extra safety precaution for this weekend's Full Gear pay-per-view.
Oh man, I was gonna say we should talk about a little bit of the time warp that we're doing here. You and I are recording this on November 5th. I don't know when
our never-ending Terminator timeline.
Yeah, I don't know. This is probably going to go out the Friday after Full Gear, but I'm recording this on the Thursday before Full Gear. Later on tonight, actually, our AEW correspondent Guapo and I are going to be previewing the show. But if you're listening to this and it goes out when I think it's going out, this will have already gone and passed and whatever. And since we're talking about
Eddie Kingston's the champion now.
Since we've pretty much, JD from New York, except good. I'm an asshole. It's fine. But I mean, quick shout out to the match that they just added. I think it was last night, the Allison Kay versus Serena Deeb, because the match for the actual AEW women's title does not matter.
Well, that's what I was getting into, and you picked up on it perfectly. As much as I do enjoy the tag division in AEW, and they do have some things that I prefer over NXT, their women's division is certainly not one of them. It leaves so much to be desired, and they do have a few talented individuals there, but for the most part, they're lacking in skill, and that's why pulling women from outside of their company has been so successful for them, as in Serena Deeb, Thunder Rosa. I believe Deeb's now signed, but it took them, at some point in time for them to continue with all this. So it's like, with Deeb having the NWA title, and her being signed there, it's like, all right, what's going to go on? How many times can they use her? But it's just they need to procure better talent, surely.
And see, I agree and I disagree, and this is where I'm going to say this in a way that I hope is hyping up NXT and not necessarily putting down AEW. You could take some talents with a lot less experience, a lot less, rough around the edges type things, and they could succeed in NXT. And I'm going to leave this I'm going to skip on this topic, and then I'm going to leave it, because I think at a later date you and I could do an entire pod on women from other promotions that we would like to see in NXT. Yeah. But the thing is,
NXT definitely cultivates their roster. They let them grow. They take someone that doesn't have much experience and turns them into, from coal to a diamond, as where AEW seemingly, if you don't have the chops, come back when you do.
So you're saying you'd rather wrestle Adam Cole than Diamond Dallas Page?
Absolutely.
That was the shittiest pun I'm probably going to pull out tonight, but no promises.
Well, we can start right off with your list with that one. I mean, you mentioned Adam Cole, and who's synonymous with him is Mia Yim, so...
Really? Adam Cole and Mia Yim?
Adam Cole and Mia Yim were together for quite some time in CZW. I remember watching them early 2010s. She was originally debuted with him, and in storyline they were a couple for ages. I feel like 2 years. She did some intergender matches with him, and that's when she really first started wrestling. So.
And see, here's the thing, right? First of all, you're right. I do have Mia. I thought you were going to make the transition because we were talking about the NWA title. I thought we were going to talk about the rumors about Thunder Rosa. We can leave that to the side.
We can do that too.
We can leave that to the side for a second. I threw Mia Yim on here as an honorable mention because this is talking about the NXT roster, but I feel like I don't even want to talk about Mia Yim being on Raw because the Reckoning shit ain't it. At all.
And that's why I was going to say to you, before we get into the actual list and everything, she is not on Raw. Reckoning is on Raw.
Yeah.
And that's all there is to it.
they have two different profiles on Twitter and social media and whatever.
Mustafa Ali just gave was so perfect. Everyone's criticizing Retribution, and you laugh at their silly names and how to pronounce them, and you laugh at their masks. Well, look at that. I wore a mask, and people made fun of my name and said it was too hard to pronounce, and I wanted you to understand what, I went through. And it's like, wow, he's playing 4D chess. Let's see if Raw lets him.
I saw that, but then my immediate thought is, I get that, and I love it to a certain degree, but also they're trying to, like you say, play 4D chess and come around to a better explanation for a group that everybody's kind of laughing at right now.
Their failure of a story.
But they're also like he's trying to make a statement and a metaphor about racism there that really breaks down to like really bad Halloween costumes, and that's potentially problematic. But Mia Yim Reckoning on the main roster, but Mia Yim, the star that we knew her as in NXT from the Mae Young Classic, I know she was in Impact for a while.
I didn't see any of her stuff in Impact.
Neither did I. I knew that there was a wrestler named Jade in Impact, and that she was coming over into the Mae Young Classic. And then halfway through the Mae Young Classic, I think I asked, it might have been Guapo or Connor or somebody, but I'm like, so who was this chick that came over from thing? And, it's Mia Yim. And obviously with the Mae Young Classic, with the amount of talent that they put in the two Mae Young Classics, and by the way, they didn't put Stephanie in there into the Mae Young Classic, so when AEW does a tournament and sticks the boss's wife in there, there's a statement to be made there. I'm not going to do it. It's fine. But she wasn't. I mean, they did a profile on her afterwards when she got offered a job, and they gave her sort of the Cedric Alexander treatment in the behind-the-scenes segments or whatever. But I don't remember, and we're talking about somebody I like here. I don't remember her making very many headlines as far as the Mae Young Classic goes, because there was a lot of people that we're going to talk about later on, specifically the ones that ended up in the UK for a while, that took all the headlines.
Her first match was against Sarah Logan, so it was kind of like a fart in church. People noticed but didn't care.
Yeah.
It was like, all right.
And I mean, talk about somebody who's not in the company right now. I mean, congrats to her. Her and Ro are about to have a kid. They're building their family and all that thing. That's wonderful.
Excellent.
But like,
congrats to them. But
so under, like, the little bits that we saw of Sarah Logan, even though it was mostly on the main roster, like, she was good, and they never gave her anything.
She was, and she didn't really fit with the Riot Squad, and she could have.
And then they tried to do like.
It wasn't a terrible pairing, but she just always felt like the odd one out there, and like she had more to offer.
And then it felt like she was leaning a little bit into the Viking thing. And then it pulled back a little bit, and then they just made her a generic, like, roster member number 5, which is super unfortunate. But, I mean, that's sort of what Mia Yim was in the Mae Young Classic.
Mia Yim, she got eliminated in the second round by Baszler, so it was pretty quick. And then it was, almost a year before she entered the Mae Young Classic for the second time?
Yeah.
And then that's when she lost to Toni Storm in the quarterfinals, so.
And, I mean, going out to Shayna Baszler, going out to Toni Storm, I mean, Toni Storm we're obviously going to talk about in round 3, and Shayna Baszler's already gone to the main roster being a dork with Nia Jax, but neither one of those are bad people to go out to. So if you're making your good showings against those two. Toni Storm's a fucking star, and Shayna Baszler is terrifying.
And I still like Baszler. I can't stand Nia Jax, as we've covered many, many times before for a multitude of reasons. But
I mean, like, everybody. I mean, the prime example, somebody else we're going to talk about later on. Look at Rhea Ripley in the Mae Young Classic versus the Rhea Ripley we have now. Night and day.
Yeah,
in the ring, as a character, as a image and a presence. But I mean, you got to go to the same thing for Mia Yim. She came into NXT, started becoming character, started, I hate to go with stereotypes, but pulling out a little bit of that gangster attitude. I started later on calling her like the urban version of Lita, and becoming way more of a character, having way more attitude. And what I've started calling, there's a couple people on NXT specifically, but in wrestling, that I refer to as being more character than wrestler. I think the last time we spoke, actually, I used that reference for Damian Priest, and that's not a bad thing.
And were you there at TakeOver Toronto in August?
Yeah, that match shit the bed. Yeah,
when she took on Baszler.
There was something not hitting in that match. And to be fair, though, and it's not about compare and contrast, but they were on the same card. This was back when you didn't have two women's matches on the card very often, and they had to share a card with Candice LeRae versus Io Shirai. So they were going up against some stiff performance competition in that pay-per-view, so I give them some slack, but I will say that match wasn't good. But I do think Mia Yim goes into a little bit of what I call I use this example a lot when I'm talking about Alexa Bliss, but I call it Bella syndrome. Is the strict wrestling critics out there that will say she's a 1 in the ring because she's not a 10, and she's not a 1.
No,
like, she might be a 6 or a 7, whereas you've got technical master classes out there like Charlotte, like Io Shirai, like Candice LeRae, and whatever, that, no, she's not on the same level as them. But, just because you're not everything doesn't mean you're nothing. And I think that applies to a lot of the people that we're going to talk about as we go through. It's not black and white. There is a sliding scale. There is such thing as a mid-card. You're a mid-card. You're in the mid-card of a developmental brand. And you don't have to be perfect in the mid-card of a developmental brand. I mean, she's on Raw now as Reckoning, but that's the thing. We said this before we came on the air too. I've broken this down. As I said, for those of you listening, we're going to be doing this in 3 pods. It's basically the lower card, the middle card, and sort of the main event. And when we get to the main event pod, that's going to be some deep, tasty conversation. But realistically, you don't have a low card in NXT. You've got a lower card that could be the mid card, because everybody that I consider the mid card is full of people that could be the main event.
Yeah, they could. They all have the potential to be top tier talent. Yeah. No doubt about it.
I did want to show some love to me. I love her character. I love her attitude. I love the fact that NXT sort of skimmed around the fact that her and Keith Lee were an item, and they acknowledged it when it was appropriate, but they didn't make them the couple.
Yeah, as where Seth and Becky immediately had to become an on-screen item and start fighting together.
Well, they have the thing as well with Gargano and Candice LeRae, which absolutely works, because
it worked, but it wasn't a focal point until it needed to be. You knew they were together, but it wasn't
until that was the story.
Exactly. They didn't have to constantly be together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They didn't have to make it the story, and I think because, if you're talking strictly about WWE, NXT is sort of like the smart mark section of WWE. So they are very dangerous in walking a fine line, because you don't want to make every couple that's in your company into a story, but if you're dealing with smart-ass people, you can't not acknowledge it either.
Yeah, but if you look at Becky and Seth, I mean, they took 2 separate stories, one with Lacey, one with Baron Corbin, and they just combined them into one. And
that was the greatest main event of all time.
I did like the intergender match, don't get me wrong, but the fact that they took those 2 separate stories just to mash them together just because they were a couple is what's agitating.
I mean, the best thing to come out of that was everybody that was saying that Seth Rollins needs to take Twitter lessons from Becky.
That is the truth. and that's what led to his downfall with the fans. Thankfully, he turned heel and accepted it, but his Twitter rantings really are what killed him.
Yeah, but
but
he's got his group now, or his little storyline there now, and the new diva coming out of that is Aaliyah. So let's see how sketchy that gets. I guarantee you, like right now, she's signed as an acting talent. In a couple of years or so, if she shows up in NXT, that there's a story there. There's a story they could tell there if she decided to go that way.
Yeah, another Mysterio. Hey.
I mean, not like we don't have enough, big, large families in WWE. But anyways, yeah, like I said, we're starting this off, and we've already rambled into it quite a bit, and that was only our honorable mention, because she's not technically in NXT anymore. The other honorable mention I'm going to throw out there, and this is strictly based on a rumor, and yes, it's sort of vindictive because it's NXT versus AEW, is the rumors that NXT is pursuing Thunder Rosa.
Yes, and we've heard this from some reliable sources. I mean, we know AEW is also interested in her as well. NWA doesn't want to lose her. She's a hot commodity. We've spoken to her on the show a few times. She's very nice, and she's just a great all-around person who's very, very, very talented in the ring, and shouldn't be as talented as she is with how short of time she's been wrestling.
Yeah.
You figure she started in 2014. She's got about 6 years, roughly. She made her debut in late 2014 for Supreme Pro Wrestling in Sacramento, and from there she went to Lucha, Ring of Honor, Women of Wrestling. She was in Tokyo in the Joshi Pro, obviously NWA, and now past AEW. Who knows? But
and see,
she's just been all over, and she's also a mixed martial arts competitor as well. So she's got one loss so far.
And this is why you get somebody like Jake on your show to be the living, breathing encyclopedia. Because I was going to say, the first time I ever saw Thunder Rosa?
When was that?
On Dynamite.
Oh, really? So you weren't introduced to her until then? So.
I had heard the name, and I think I had seen, not necessarily, her face, but, I had seen the imagery of, the half-painted face and all that sort of thing. And I, it's like...
And you're like, it's a female Darby Allin, yeah.
Well, no, I hadn't heard it in that context, but it used to be I never really paid attention to ROH, but you would hear whispers in the background of, hey, watch out for Tyler Black, watch out for Chris Hero, watch out for this guy Bryan Danielson, and all that sort of thing. So it's one of those names that I heard out in the ether, in the periphery, and it's maybe I'll see this person one day. And... Again, I find it hard to say this without sounding like I'm dumping on AEW, but to make a big splash in their women's division doesn't take very much.
No, because I hate to be mean, but they're most of it's been so subpar compared to other divisions and companies.
Well, their best character hasn't been wrestling because she was injured. So that's unfortunate. But she came in and she had her first match, I believe, against Serena Deeb, just as an exhibition before she went on to face Shida at their last show All Out?
I believe it was.
Yeah, and again, it's much like ROH. I'm not very familiar with NWA. I know it's out there. I know it exists as a thing. I know Magnus is over there. Or Nick Aldis, I guess, is his name. Mr. Mickey James, it's fine. But it's okay, so they've started up, and I think Billy Corgan's associated with them. Am I right? Am I
yes, yeah,
off the wall there?
He's one of the with NWA. Yeah, he's one of the owners.
So they've sort of kicked that off again, and obviously we saw the NWA title with Nick Aldis and Cody Rhodes at the All In pay-per-view before AEW was a thing. So again, like I say, as much as I do kind of like to know what's going on, I'm really pretty much still the WWE guy. But again, it's NWA is one of those things that's out there on the periphery. New Japan is one of those things that's out there on the periphery. If I hear a handful of names from New Japan, and it's they're gonna bring this person and cross them over with AEW. Okay, that's cool. I guess I'll see them when I see them. Thunder Rosa is very much the same way. Thunder Rosa, though, immediately made an impression on me. Immediately impressed. Immediately, why the hell are you in AEW? Clearly they brought you and your title over because something that they're doing is not working. Selfishly, I would love to see her in NXT. I would absolutely,
I would as well. I mean, all the possibilities and dream matches we can get out of that. She's only improving. She's only getting better and better. If you really want to, go and look up some of her matches against, like, Tennille Dashwood, in Ring of Honor. Those were really good. Where she used to team up, what's her name? I forget. But it was the Twisted Sisters, and they would take on, like, one of the good matches is Britt Baker. She used to face Madison Rain is another one. So, I mean, there's a few really good Ring of Honor matches that you can check out with her that you'll also be impressed with. But all in all, she's just gotten better, as I said, as time continues. And you saw that against Serena Deeb and in AEW. And from there, I mean, her being in NXT would certainly be, I don't want to say a blessing, but something that I'm very much so interested in.
And there's something about it, and like, everybody's got a little bit of a different style. People complain that, once you're in WWE, everybody does the WWE style. There's something about her style that's, like, hard-hitting, but yet, like, reserved at the same time. And I think you could play a lot of mental games with that, depending on if you want to play her off as being face or being heel, or just throw her in there with some. I mean, one of my default answers is always going to be Shotzi. Like, Thunder Rosa could elevate Shotzi, and vice versa. You could have like a early Edge and Christian versus the Hardy Boys. One side lifts up the other.
Oh, absolutely. I can see those two. I don't want to say like always 50-50, but that kind of sense where they have a best of 7 series. That I could be in for.
Yeah, and that would be, and again, something like, I don't want to say, Shotzi's my girl. I don't want to say, okay, I like her, so automatically everybody needs to throw the belt on her. But if you get another new face in there, you get 2 new faces, lifting themselves up over here. You can still have a title story over here. You can still have another main event feud over here, and expand out the branching of that NXT women's division. And also, when the rumors started circulating that she was coming to NXT, I got into a conversation with somebody, and it wasn't hostile like Twitter usually is, but it's one of those, like, I was making the point of, like, why would you not go where the best women's division in mainstream North American wrestling is? The argument I was given back is like, oh, don't you think she would take it as a challenge to, like, elevate a roster that's not quite there yet? And it's like, yeah, you could take it as a challenge, but unless that's what you want to do, a brand new company putting a brand new women's division on her shoulders to focus on that division instead of focusing on herself is a hell of an ask.
It is.
Now, if she wants to take, okay, now I'll flip that. If she wants to take on that challenge, then I'd say good for her. Because I do think, as much as I take some shots at the women's division in AEW, I do think there's a lot of gold that could be mined there if they had a couple of older hands sort of helping them out. So I really hope selfishly that she's coming to NXT, but we'll see how it goes.
I do as well, out of every possibility that she's teased over and over and trolled her audience about.
Oh, what was the thing she did on Twitter where she had like all the initials of all the different companies like written on her hip, and so, like, hey guys, where should I go? And see, I love that too, because she knows that we're paying attention to the dirt sheets, so why would she not feed into that?
Now she's like, well, should I go to the NFL or the MLB or the NBA, or now she's just running it into the ground. But
you know what I didn't mention when we started as well? 4 reasons. Originally, when I started throwing this list together, the PWI Women's 100 had just come out. So I do have the numbers for the women that did rank. There's a lot of people on this list that didn't rank, unfortunately, though. Talking about Mia Yim as our honorable mention. For all the criticism that people throw at her, she's still ranked at number 36. Thunder Rosa, the pick that we want for NXT, is at 14.
Yeah.
So 14 out of the top 100. That ain't too bad.
No, not at all. That's a hell of an accomplishment for sure. And that's the thing, as you said before, you don't want to take away from AEW, but at the same time we're trying to praise NXT for their women's division, and I feel that's because NXT's women are more than just women. They're not just eye candy. And I feel this is going to get heat, I'm sure, but if you look at AEW, they'll say, oh, Raw did it, but I'm not talking about Raw. If you strictly look at NXT, what was the beach theme? Was it Fight for the Fallen or Fighter Fest with AEW? And they have the ring girls around the ring in bikinis, you know.
Yeah.
They have the dancing girls for Kenny, you know, and then most of their matches.
And see, I don't know. See, I am going to disagree.
I don't mind it.
I'm going to disagree with you there because I don't put that on the same thing. That's where people talk about, you know, oh, why do we have wrestling valets? You know, it's so demeaning and whatever. In wrestling, but you got to draw a big, because if you have a valet that's also a wrestler, you got to play that fine line. If you got somebody that's there as a valet or as a manager, you gotta let us know. Or if they're dancing in the background, or if they're on Raw, Underground, etc. You got to draw the line between those women that are there to be dancing women and women that these are our women that wrestle. They are athletes. They are here to be athletes. They are here to be taken seriously. Yeah, that's why it drove me nuts. It drove me absolutely nuts that one person that never got a shot in the NXT women's division at all, period, to compete at all, was Zelina Vega. Because she's another one that
strictly just a manager.
She's another one that gets called a 1 because she's not a 10 in the ring, and she's not. The fact that they had her booked recently against Asuka was like, okay, she's gonna die, but she can wrestle,
and she lost in quick fashion too. But she is a decent wrestler. She's not as great as everybody made her out to sound to be, but she's not, you know, floundering either.
Yeah. But I mean, they put her with Asuka. Asuka's a pro, and Asuka helped her look great. But I mean,
Asuka elevated her, but
how much
wasn't going to do much for Asuka.
How much better would she be now if when she was in NXT with Andrade, if they had also let her do a couple things on her own, or at least done some, like, you know, I don't want to downgrade it like this, but like let her at least do some NXT house shows or something.
Yeah, hone her craft. Exactly.
Absolutely the exact same comparison that I will make with Alexa Bliss. Because Alexa Bliss is great. Alexa Bliss, even in the success that she's had currently on the main roster, Alexa Bliss, in my opinion, is still underrated as fuck.
Oh, she absolutely is.
And she got saddled. She got saddled with Blake and Murphy in NXT. And I mean, Buddy Murphy's doing some stuff now. Blake obviously got sucked into the whole Forgotten Sons thing. Mm-hmm. But those two as a tag team were a charisma vacuum.
Yeah.
To say nothing about their physical ability, because that's not what I'm talking about.
No, but they had
she was tasked with standing behind them and trying to make them interesting.
Yeah,
and
now to make them look good, and it worked to a certain extent, but there's only so much she could do.
But now you see the flexibility, and they have put her with somebody else, and look at the flexibility that she's shown between the stuff that she's done on her own on the main roster, the tag team stuff that she's done with.
Yeah, now she's showing her acting chops.
And now she's doing the thing with the Fiend, and we talked about this last time. Oh, it's just a crappy B horror movie. Yeah, and it's awesome because it knows what it is. It's not trying to be serious.
No, not at all. But my main point to that was that I feel like NXT really wants the women to be more than just women, like larger than life, is where I don't get that feeling from AEW. And I'm not saying they're objectifying their women. I'm just saying that from what they've shown us, it doesn't feel like the women's division is as important as it should be.
See, one of the things that I will say about AEW is I love Hikaru Shida. I've been saying for a while now I'd love to see Hikaru Shida versus Io Shirai. But I feel like they threw the belt on her, and then they sort of show her in the crowd, and then they wheel her out when it's time for her pay-per-view match.
Yes.
And that doesn't do anything.
In between, there's nothing.
And I mean, they build up a contender. In this case, it's just going to be Nyla Rose again. Your champion needs to have some focus.
That's been the problem. If you look at their women's division so far, is that most of the stuff that we've seen as far as title fights, and it's just been again rematches, or the same few feuds, Riho and Nyla, or Shida and Nyla. Has pretty much been all we've seen for the belt.
And you know what? Even if you were going to repeat what the matchup is, it would be good if you threw some story in there. It would be good even if you could just build on the last one, because the last one was good. The one where it was title versus title, it was her versus Thunder Rosa, and it was all good.
Yeah.
And now,
But they had to bring in Thunder Rosa to get that to be worthwhile.
Yeah, which is a stretch, but at least the result was good. Nyla Rose, I couldn't give a flying shit about.
Yeah,
I really couldn't.
I speak to cares about her at all, and it's not because of the transitioning either. No. I hate that even has to be said, but she's just not interesting. It's another large powerhouse female. We've seen it in there's a better version of that in Awesome Kong.
Nyla Rose is literally Nia Jax. But
Yes.
but at least Nia Jax is a little bit self-aware now, and she's sort of developing this sarcastic cockiness. I still don't like her in the ring. I still don't like any stories that she's in, but she's a little bit self-aware now. I'm loath to make this comparison, but John Cena. Everybody hated John Cena for years and years and years, and then he clued into exactly why people hated him and was able to play off of it. And you can kind of be like, all right, yeah, you got us.
Yeah, he turned it around and spun it.
And Nia Jax, to her credit, is starting to pick up a little bit of that. She's starting to play up everything about her that people find obnoxious, and I think that's good. Nyla Rose is all of those things without doing any of that, and they put Vicky Guerrero with her, which just seems like such a Band-Aid.
It really is Band-Aid on a bullet wound, and they're trying to go ahead and have Miss Excuse Me, be her personality, but
yeah. I mean, to be fair,
you're just transplanting an old character onto a new person, and it doesn't benefit you.
It's just AEW's way of saying like look who we've got type thing. I feel like they wheel out Billy Gunn. Like they wheel out Billy Gunn, or they wheel out DDP, or they wheel out, Tully Blanchard or Arn Anderson, and it feels like a whole lot of, yes, managers are a lost art in wrestling, and I think it's cool that they're bringing that back.
I like the fact that they're having managers again, and valets, and
but they're popping it off like, look who we've got, and
then mostly for the most part, most of the managers have not been a factor in anything.
Right.
Like you said, it's just been eye candy to be presented as, look at this legend or so and so.
I'm sorry,
Tully's done more recently with FTR and things, but
I care more about Taz than I care about Brian Cage or Ricky Starks.
Yeah.
And that's a manager done the wrong way, in my opinion.
Yeah, because you're supposed you can like them a lot, but you're supposed to, their job is to make you care about their talent. So.
But no, getting back to what I was saying with, I don't know what I was saying. I was saying something about AEW's champion.
Well, we were talking about the list for the top 100, and that's how we kind of trailed off. But
so Mia Yim's at 36, Thunder Rosa's at 14. I should have mentioned that at the beginning, and I didn't. I got to transition into two ladies, though, that unfortunately didn't even make the list and are kind of floating in purgatory right now because Shayna Baszler's on the main roster, and that's Marina Shafir and Jessamyn Duke. And we said...
Yeah, Marina Shafir, I mean, she's had 3 matches, 1 win, 2 losses in MMA. As far as her amateur record is much, much better. She's 5-0. But we haven't gotten a lot from her or Jessamyn Duke either for their actual wrestling career. I mean, they've both done better MMA-wise. Jessamyn Duke has 3 wins, 5 losses, and her her amateur record is 5-2, so a bit better there. Granted, but like I said, for both of them, Jessamyn Duke was on the Ultimate Fighter and then debuted in NXT, alongside Shayna Baszler, obviously. Same thing with Marina Shafir. And I liked them as a group together. I appreciated the other 4 horsewomen of the apocalypse that they were going for with Ronda Rousey. That was always the idea. And the fact that we never got to see those 4 together yet is still a huge miss in my eyes. They had chances many times to pull that off while Ronda was around, and it would have worked perfect. But
I pushed for that as well. In hindsight, now that we're pulling farther and farther away from the possibility, I think they saved themselves in a certain degree because having them there be always there as Baszler's backup, and they had the odd match here and there, they weren't getting the experience that they needed. Because Shayna Baszler took to it like a fish to water. Ronda Rousey the same way. Yeah. These two haven't had the same opportunities. They didn't get to hop in the ring with Triple H and Kurt Angle at WrestleMania as their debut match. They haven't had those same opportunities. And if you're going to play the new person, you're going to play the new person. But
most of what they did was just help for interference, so Baszler can get the title from, what was it, first Kairi Sane and then onwards.
Right, but what I'm saying is the horsewomen versus horsewomen match that everybody wanted, including myself. If I'm looking at that, you've got a superstar in Ronda Rousey, a superstar that developed in Baszler, and obviously, the four horsewomen of NXT. are quote unquote untouchable. I think you would have run the risk of these two sticking out like sore thumbs.
You could have, but I wouldn't have done it on a main stage big deal. I would have brought Rousey to NXT.
Oh, for a takeover, right?
Yeah, and just I think that would have worked.
Yeah.
So much better, and would have gotten so many more eyes on NXT. Because you figure...
Oh, yeah, no, for sure.
Shafir and Duke, their first match, they lost, both of them. They took on Io Shirai and Dakota Kai. And that was, the December 19th episode when that happened.
Right.
It's like 2018, so, in that time frame. But that's when they debuted in May. So from May onwards, they haven't had any matches. And then they finally, October, they're actually appearing at Evolution and helping and all this kind of stuff. And it's like from there, we didn't really get much from them, as you said. So It was unfortunate. And then after so much inactivity, I felt like it was at least, 6-7 months, we finally got them back on Raw Underground, which was a perfect place, as we said earlier, for these two to be because, you add that bit of realism in here, knowing that both of them have an MMA background. So you have real fighters that can really wrestle.
And the thing with Raw Underground, as much as some people thought it was really goofy, you didn't need much character for Raw Underground. Like the Dabba-Kato guy just showed up and he was big. Arturo Ruiz, who's never really gone anywhere in NXT. Riddick Moss, who hasn't really done anything anywhere else, but just showed up and did stuff. It was like
was just about looking strong and kicking ass. And
it was literal Fight Club.
And it played to all of their strengths because the matches were about a minute long apiece, and it wasn't a lot of wrestling skill, as in the performance side of wrestling.
It was just
more
scrapping.
Takedowns and scrapping. Yeah, absolutely. So
the biggest example I can think of, and it's sort of the opposite of the point that I'm trying to make for these two ladies, is I would much rather see Dolph Ziggler in Raw Underground than on Raw or on SmackDown, because he just went in there and did stuff. And for whatever they've done to his character over the past several years, to just go in there and show his physical wrestling ability in a sort of a situation where the character was secondary was probably the best thing. They only did it 1 or 2 nights, but it was the best thing they could have done for him. Now, conversely, take these two ladies who don't have much character, but at the same time, it means they don't have any bad character to shake off, and they can just show themselves with physicality. Yeah. But as I say, in the actual wrestling ring, be it on NXT or wherever they end up next, because I think it's sort of a gray area with where they are, with them showing up on Raw Underground. It was never really clarified whether that meant that they were part of Raw. I don't think...
Yeah, they were only part of the Underground. It was never confirmed that they were officially added to the Raw roster. And then with everything that happened with the draft, there was no mention of them. So as of right now, I believe they're still considered with NXT. But
yeah. Now, I don't really think, and they like we've said, they didn't even rank on the PWI thing. I don't think there's any push for either one of these to be a superstar at the moment. I do think that they could be used on NXT. We had a very similar conversation in one of our podcasts about the team of Lorcan and Birch. Now they're on to something very, very different now with Pat McAfee's group. But before, they were a little bit personality-less, but they went in there and they were legit as hell in the ring, and they were really, really, really sort of gritty fighters, and they weren't the focus of the match, but whoever went in there and had a match with them looked really, really good. Like, they were, I hate to say it, but like violent Dolph Zigglers. I think either one of these women or both could play that role, either in a tag team scenario if they were trying to put over, like, say a really, really, really underdog team that you really wanted everybody. Catanzaro and Carter is my example. They got the smaller size, they're a little bit quicker, but they've got no, sort of body mass to throw around. They want to play the underdog. Put them up against these two wrecking machines, and they don't have to have very much of a story or a personality or anything like that just yet, because they don't. But they could play that sort of that roadblock role, if you get what I mean. Yeah. And I think they could be great as that.
They are still both part of the NXT roster, according to WWE.com.
The one thing I will say, and the one thing that NXT handled really, really well, and there's not very much that we can say that they handled really, really well that has to do with the Velveteen Dream. But when Velveteen Dream came back and he had Marina Shafir on his tights because he was fucking with Roderick Strong at the time,
yeah,
it would have been really, really tempting for anything with a WWE label on it to take one of those women right out of the women's division and just turn her into something that these two guys were fighting over. Like that trophyism, right?
Could have been good.
And but they never did that. And I'm kind of glad that they never did that.
You think so?
it would have been a cool point for their story. It would have been a cool, like, personality building thing. Because if you remember when Roderick Strong and Bobby Roode fought, Bobby Roode went after Roderick Strong's family a lot. Not face to face with Marina per se, but just mentioning, you know, where their lot was in life and talking about his wife and all that sort of thing. What you get from that, though, is you take her out of being a member of the female roster and you put her clearly in the category of just being a prop. And while that would have helped the guys' feud, it wouldn't have helped her at all, is my point.
True.
For their story, for Dream and Strong's story, it would have been a strong building block, no pun intended. But I don't think, if we're talking about it from the perspective of the women's division and building the women's division and building the women in that division, taking one of them out to be a prop doesn't help any of that.
That's true. That does make sense. So.
And Jessamine Duke, is she even associated with anybody in wrestling? Do we know?
I don't believe so.
Okay. So, like, she wouldn't have run that risk anyway, but it's something that wrestling does a lot. Like, if wrestling didn't do it so much, I mean, look at Raw. Less than a year ago, Rusev and Bobby Lashley and the Lana cucking story, and we don't need any more of that. And Liv Morgan was a lesbian for 5 minutes. It's fine. When they have an actual lesbian on the roster, we're not talking about Raw. People wonder why I don't talk about Raw. But yeah, nothing too coming back to the point. Nothing too exciting for these two right now, but I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing. They haven't failed at anything. They just haven't been put in a slot yet. So it's very much a wait and see. So them not really ranking, them really not being on the show at the moment gives us something to look forward to, because it means in a month, in 2 months, in 3 months, we could have something new. Now, that helps me translate into the next person we're going to talk about, because the next person we're going to talk about, I could have slotted into that category, except now they're sort of starting to give her a story, even though we don't really know what the story is yet, and that's somebody else that didn't rank in the women's 100, and that's Xia Li, who is
you figure
amazing in the ring.
The Performance Center, early 2017, before the Mae Young Classic?
Yep.
And she kind of just started, she impressed the scouts when they went to China, and they're like, oh, let's bring her in. So she is a Performance Center project.
Yeah.
And that's one of the standouts for these. Most of the other women have come from elsewhere. They've been trained. They've been, so that's what makes this a bit interesting in her case. And, that same thing with Gonzalez. We'll get to her after. But like you said, we're starting to get a storyline. We don't know what's going on with her family and the letters and her need to win, and it's getting interesting.
I've heard a lot of people speculating that it could be like something as distasteful as, she's only in America because somebody slipped her some papers in exchange for her doing really well, and, hey, you better start winning or we're going to deport you, or some shit like that. If that's the case, I'm not for that, because that's racist as fuck.
They'll be that.
But it's the longer they drag it out and just make it really, really uncomfortable. Because there's a lot of movies that center around themes like that. Hey, send the daughter over to America. Send the daughter over to America to do whatever she needs to do. The more that they don't
money back to pay for her family,
something along those lines, and
Boa pay for whatever the scenario.
And or if you want to do it like a Chinese mafia type thing and have Boa there as the big bad scary enforcer guy who's just there sort of looming. I'm pretty sure that's not what it is, but until they tell us what it actually is, there are little hints towards things that feel... I'm not saying that it is that. Trust me, I don't think even WWE would do that. But there are... It is really, really uncomfortable right now, because you've got this woman who, up until quite recently, has been sort of a happy-go-lucky, sort of shy, quiet character, who's all of a sudden in this really uncomfortable, pressurized, unknown situation. So it's intentionally uncomfortable for the audience, I believe. And if
she's heel at this point, right? I mean, that's how they're...
I don't know that she's necessarily heel. I think she's...
Because they say with her attacking, obviously, Caden Carter...
Right, but I think they're trying to play
Halloween Havoc.
I think they're trying to play that off as like whatever this pressure is on her is making her break a little bit. It's making her desperate a little bit.
That's how I took it. I mean, online she's listed as turning heel with that, and I was like, I don't know, but
she may be. Well, this is the thing though. Like if she's having some sort of a breakdown or some sort of a desperation where she's doing heelish things in her desperation to get out of this stressful situation that she's in. That builds on the story.
It makes her actions.
It makes the story incredible, but I don't think that necessarily makes her a heel.
Yeah, I wouldn't put her in the heel category yet either. So that's why I was.
But if you play it off like somebody really nice, like a Casey Catanzaro or whatever, reaches out and tries to help her, and she's so scared of the help because it might make her look weak, and then she won't get what she wants, and she lashes out at that person, then yeah, for the purposes of that match in isolation, by virtue of the fact that her opponent is face, she gets called a heel. But I don't think that's an overarching story. I don't
think this is a full heel turn for her. But I am interested to see where they go with this, because we really haven't seen that much of her. From where she is right now, she's good in the ring.
Yep. She's always been on the show.
She's the first Chinese woman to ever compete in a WWE ring, so that's a huge touting point for them too, with diversity stakes.
Yeah. I will say, like, in contrast to us talking about Marina Shafir, Jessamine Duke a minute ago, they haven't really done anything with her, but she's always kind of been there. Like, she has been constant on the show. Like, she's in the mind. It's just we've never really known how to take her because there's not really a story. The story's always been like, oh, somebody that she's facing is involved in a story and they need a win to give them a little bit of momentum to go forward. So I do think she's got a leg up on Shafir and Duke, in the case that even if we didn't have any investment in her, she was in the consciousness. Like, she was on, like, every 2 or 3 weeks in something. And I think that sort of slow burn is what I want for Shafir and Duke, where if they start just getting on and randomly doing some stuff and eventually get a story, you have what you have with Xia Li right now, where she was on forever as just, like, again, not being derogatory, but just to be the other person in the ring.
Yeah, it's the truth. It's not derogatory.
Yeah, well, I just don't mean to put down her contributions is all.
No, but I understand what you're getting at.
But to have her, like, she was in the consciousness where they aren't, and to have her in the consciousness for so long, not doing anything, and then be handed something, we kind of get rewarded for paying attention all along. And I think that's good. I think it's the... everybody wants their favorite wrestler to be champion. How long did I wait for Jeff Hardy to become WWE champion? And how much more did it mean at the time? How long have we waited for them to do something with Xia Li, and they're giving her something, and we don't know what it is, but because we waited so long for her to have something, we're going to grip onto it, and we're going to want to know, and we're going to want to know. And I think that's awesome slow burn shit. For a story that could eventually be nothing, let's be fair. But I think they're playing it safe, and they're playing a really quiet sort of background game with her. WWE usually doesn't do subtlety.
No, they don't.
So let's give them a little bit of credit while we can.
Well, I see that's the thing. Lately, the more and more things progress with NXT, I look at the two completely separate. I look at WWE as Raw and SmackDown, and NXT as its own entity at this point.
Yeah, and that's
That's the only way it keeps me sane.
That's where sort of the anomaly of AEW did in fact bite NXT in the ass, because before AEW came along, there were people that enjoyed NXT, and the only way that they could convince themselves to enjoy NXT was to convince themselves that it's not part of WWE. Yeah. And then they didn't need to do that anymore because they had a boat to hop onto that was actually not WWE. But there's still...
Thankfully.
Like, I don't care. Even if they turn around and tell us that next week NXT is coming from the Thunderdome, it's still NXT. Unless they completely hand it over to Vince and, they went through an entire Halloween themed mini pay-per-view last week, and we already talked about how awesome that was. It wasn't, the club and the Usos having a trick or street fight with pumpkins and turkeys on their head and shit. Like, they even did the corny shit well. Is my point there. But again, as I said, well, they did the whole zombie thing with Dexter Lumis, but we don't really need to talk about that. Xia Li, slow burn shit. WWE doing subtlety where they don't typically do subtlety. That alone is going to make me pay attention. Well, they've got all the other crackerjack, big box office, Michael Bay-ish stuff happening in the main event. When we get to part 3, those 6 women that we're going to talk about in part 3, that's your Michael Bay full of explosions shit.
Yeah, that's your grand finale.
But by contrast, doing something slight and sort of drip feeding us this uncomfortable Xia Li story gives you that contrast that you need.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, same thing with Isla Dawn, who's next on the list.
There we go. I love this girl.
I like her too, but I haven't seen that much of her. For what I have seen, she's been good. I just only know her from NXT UK. I don't know her from anything else, so I don't even know if she was ever in another promotion. She's one of the ones that I know the least about here. So
yeah, I covered both of the Mae Young Classics on this channel. People that want to even go back and check that now, there are playlists for both of the Mae Young Classics and my reviews for that. And Isla Dawn was in the second Mae Young Classic, because the second Mae Young Classic was basically, and I don't want to say that motivations are always clear-cut, but the second iteration of the Mae Young Classic was basically to build a women's division for NXT UK. Because if you see the names that came out of there, you had, right off the top of the head, you had Isla Dawn, you had Piper Niven, who we're going to talk about later, you had Toni Storm, you had Rhea Ripley. Just those 4 alone, and they all immediately were transplanted into NXT UK. And the ones that became top stars were pretty obvious, and they became top stars and gave us lots to talk about. But Isla Dawn is she's just cool. And, you can heap a bunch of praise on somebody. You can tell them that they do 5-star matches in the Tokyo Dome. You can say that they're super hot on the mic. You can say they've got great, deep, intense character and story arcs and whatever. But then it's also okay to just sit back and see a star and be like, you know what, they're pretty cool. And that's what I think of Isla Dawn right now. Because, as I say, for a hot minute, I was going to start reviewing NXT UK again when it came back up, and then 3 weeks in, I look at it, and they're still in the empty arena era, and even though it's good, I can't get motivated to watch it. And what you hear about outside of the show, when the cameras stop rolling, and how they have no audience even in their home part of the world, and it sort of kills your enthusiasm a little. But you get somebody like an Isla Dawn, who's definitely a character, who definitely falls into that creepy, crazy girl category, which is entirely my niche. I mean, look at the ones that I like: Sonya Deville, Shotzi Blackheart, Nikki Cross, Alexa Bliss, Lita, AJ Lee. Like, anybody that knows me and knows what I like in wrestling knows I'm gonna love Isla Dawn. But they just sort of gently hint at like the vampire genre. A little bit.
Just a little bit. And that's what I like to it.
But not enough to make her a cartoon.
No, it doesn't look silly. It doesn't look foolish.
She's not Kevin Thorne.
Yes. And I mean, she's very young, too. And she's, 26, I believe?
I think so. And I mean, let's be real for a second. She ain't hard to look at.
Oh,
she's really not.
No doubt about that. And
here's the thing, right? I will never, like, you and I have had a lot of conversations, Nia Jax, Piper Niven, we got body types of all shapes and sizes in NXT and WWE, even over across the way in AEW, and I'm never going to make body type an issue, but we are so diverse in WWE right now, there could be a lightweight women's title. You get your Hila Dawns and your Casey Catanzaros and your Caden Carters and your Zelina Vegas and your Dakota Kais in there. Like, there's enough, and she plays the small wrestler well. If you watch her, she's really fluid.
Cruiserweight style.
Yeah, but it's not like Hardy Boys, Young Bucks. Everything's always explosive. Like, she's very fluid. And the fluidity goes with the sort of creepy demeanor, the vampire-adjacent mood, the way she presents herself, even down to her entrance and the way she carries herself, and the music that they've given her, which is partly a hats off to production as well. Like, it doesn't all go to her, but as a package, like, I wouldn't even put her in the main event. Really, realistically, I would put her sort of to the side, like sort of in a Shotzi Blackheart-esque portion of the roster. Selfishly, I would love to see her over in the States, over on main NXT.
Away from UK, but I mean, she credits her dancing background prior to becoming a wrestler to why she's able to be so smooth in the ring.
Oh, and it shows.
And I guess beforehand she was in, because I'm not familiar with most of the UK and overseas scene, so she was in the Scottish Wrestling Alliance, and she was there from 2013 to 16. Then she was in a ton of things, so she has a list of credits. ICW, she was back to the SWA, she was on a huge European and United States tour for a while. She did a tour with CZW, and then she ended up into Atlanta for a little bit, about a year's time, and she ended up in WWE after that. So
it's not her first rodeo for sure. And like you say, like, for her age to have all those things under her belt,
she went under her actual name and got beat by Asuka in Manchester, England during the Raw's UK tour. And
really?
She was on the November 6th episode of Monday Night Raw under her actual name, Stacey Coates, before coming into NXT under NXT UK as Dawn. So.
Yeah, well, she was Hila Dawn in the Mae Young Classic as well.
Yeah.
And it was just, even though they didn't even play up her gimmick as much, like, she still carried herself in a certain kind of way, because I guess you kind of do that naturally. But as far as her whole presentation, like, it's like most people that came out of the Mae Young Classic, to be fair. Like, they came out and just, like, basically the Mae Young Classic was like, hey, fuck you, we can wrestle.
And though she didn't rank this year, last year she ranked 96, so.
You know what? For somebody that's not really getting all that much exposure on a show that not a whole lot of people are watching, if we're honest, that ain't too shabby.
No, not at all.
And I mean, those hang back type of comments that I'm making on that isn't anything to do with her. That's just, you kind of wish the show that she's on at the moment had a little bit more of a platform.
Yeah, because sadly, I mean, they don't really, I feel like, even advertise NXT UK much.
They advertised the return, and they advertised the first women's title on the way back, which I did see. Piper Niven versus Kaylee Ray. Much like Jake was saying about Walter and Dragunov, if you didn't see Kaylee Ray versus Piper Niven, I really do encourage you to go back and see it. Piper Niven
was a fantastic match.
Piper Niven is why we don't need Nia Jax.
Yep. Like she's a bigger size. She's beautiful. She's so gorgeous. And my God, is she, for her size, she acts like she's, light as a feather. Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah, not only with the diversity of wrestling style, but she's fast. Like, she's faster than people have her size.
That's what's so incredible.
And also,
her cardio is unbelievable.
Oh, yeah.
The way she was able to continue doling out punishment in that match, and then inside the ring, outside of the ring, off the ropes, and just never taking a second. It was just awe-inspiring.
And also, 10 out of 10, would shag.
Absolutely. And then, certainly last but not least on our list is Raquel Gonzalez, who, didn't rank in the PWI, as we said, but next year, I certainly think she will, as there's a lot to come from her.
I'm going to say it. I always give you guys a peek behind the curtain if there's something to be said. Initially, I did not have Raquel Gonzalez on tonight's show. I was sort of making her part of the Dakota Kai conversation, because their act has been so much as a duo. If you saw Halloween Havoc and you saw the match she had with Rhea Ripley, that in and of itself, the match they had, it's a week ago for me as we record this. It'll be 2 weeks ago by the time you guys hear this. That was enough to just, give her own slot, and she is the quote-unquote main event of this particular pod. She needed somebody like Rhea Ripley that she didn't have to be as careful with, because everybody else in that division is smaller than her and Ripley.
Yeah.
I really do hope Mercedes Martinez being removed from Retribution means that she's coming back to NXT, because
I had heard she was, so...
Yeah, because the three of them need to be the big bad monsters of that division.
Yeah.
We saw what happened with Rhea Ripley and Mercedes Martinez in that cage match. I do want to see that match again, just the two of them. But Raquel Gonzalez as sort of being the third, being the also ran of the NXT women's division giants, is insane. The way she kept pace
tall,
with Rhea Ripley.
176 pounds. And she's 29 years old, I believe, so still on the younger side too.
Yeah, it's a very young division, eh?
It is.
As we're going, obviously you've got longer tenured wrestlers in there. Like you've got,
because she's only been wrestling for 3 years since she started training late 2016 with the Performance Center. So
yeah, and she wasn't in very many other places, I believe. I don't think she's has as extensive a resume as some of the others, but I could be wrong. But no, like you get some journeyman wrestlers in there, like a Mercedes Martinez, and the impact that somebody like her has on that division probably can't even be counted. But for the most part, it's a really young division, so a whole lot of these conversations are going to be, I can't wait to see what they do, not necessarily us just sitting here and rhyming off checklists of they did this and they did this and they did this and they did this. It's like previewing a pay-per-view. I'd much rather preview a pay-per-view because you're talking about all the things to come rather than reviewing it and just being like, well, this is what happened. And having a young roster like this absolutely allows us to do that. Raquel Gonzalez, I can't say much more than she's shown me enough that I pulled her out of her partnership with Dakota Kai to give her her own conversation. And she's in a strange spot because so many of the women on the roster currently are so much smaller, so much faster of that alternative type that it's going to be hard for her to find a match where she doesn't just look like she's throwing her opponent around the ring. But as I say, give her matches with Rhea Ripley, give her a match with Mercedes Martinez, give her, when the time is right and when the cross-branding can be, put in for a logical reason, put her in a match with Charlotte Flair.
Yeah, that would work well. And thankfully, she's big, but she's not like where you're comparing Kofi to Brock Lesnar size difference. No. She's big, but it's not something that's insurmountable for anyone to overcome.
Well, exactly, right? And you are going to have the extreme example, and I keep using Catanzaro as an example because she's so tiny. But that's the kind of match that you're going to have when Raquel Gonzalez has a big match coming up at a pay-per-view. On the go-home show, you're going to book her up against Catanzaro so you can have that one match where she's just throwing somebody around the ring to be like, hey, this is what I'm going to do to my opponent on Sunday or Saturday or whatever the case may be. And even that serves its purpose, but then that leads itself into that whole women's lightweight division thing we talked about a second ago. We went from Isla Dawn to Raquel Gonzalez, so from the lightweights to the heavyweights. But I think even just before the breakout match at Halloween Havoc, she was stepping out of that role as what do you want to say, like the Diesel, the bodyguard, the heavy. In past years, it would have been a role played by Nicole Bass, and nobody needs that type of thing.
No one
but
again.
she was thrown in the tag matches, and what was the? I'm trying to think of the tag match that they were. Oh, it was the return of Ember Moon.
Oh, okay.
When Ember Moon returned and teamed with Rhea Ripley to take on the two of them.
Yep.
Now, Raquel Gonzalez is definitely the newbie in that match, but that means immediately you were throwing her in a main event with, Dakota Kai, one of the best heels they've got right now, one of the biggest stars they've got right now in Rhea Ripley, and a big, massive return for somebody as popular as Ember Moon. So if she's already in this brief beginning part of her career on NXT, and if she's already being put up in a main event with those types of names, A, they've got a lot of faith in her, and B, they've got a lot of investment in her. And then you see the singles match, and you see why.
And just by putting her with, Rhea all this time, too, and having their feud, I mean, that was a fantastic way. I mean, obviously it was going to put Rhea over in the end, but they elevated both of them excellently.
Yeah. Well, it's got to be refreshing for Ripley, too, because Ripley is, not that it's a bad thing, she's this great, imposing, like, superstar force that she is, but it must have been fun for her, too. Like, how often does she face somebody that can, like, legitimately stare her in the eye and go punch for punch? Because there's not that many. It's like, okay, really, really lazy comparison, but who do you have an eye-to-eye, one-to-one match with the Big Show? You really don't.
Yeah.
You try with somebody
Braun.
like you try with somebody like Braun or somebody like Kane or somebody like Mark Henry or somebody like that, but you go through, that person for the most part of their career is going to be looking down the same way as a Catanzaro or an Neil Dawn or a Caden Carter is going to spend most of their career looking up. It's why when Alexa Bliss was back in NXT, I was like, okay, she's kind of tiny. She at the time was one of the smaller ones, and I'm like, this is why you let Zelina Vega wrestle a little bit. Because, I mean, Alexa Bliss is not a 10 but not a 1. Zelina Vega was sort of an unproven property at the time. At least you got somebody you can look in the eye, and there's a million other things that can contribute to the good or bad of a match. But that's got to be one of them.
It should be, but
I'm only guessing because obviously anybody that's seen me knows I'm not a wrestler, but I would have to imagine that somebody that you can find some level of equality with, even just on a physical level, has to make things easier because everything else is an adjustment, right?
Pretty much. I mean, that nails it. Yeah.
But I mean, at the same time, how well does she fit in that bodyguard role with Dakota Kai being her Shawn Michaels?
It works great. It worked so good. I thought it was a good combo for them too.
Yeah. The only thing that was a little bit weird about that was they broke up the tag team that Dakota Kai was in to give her another partner.
Yeah,
I mean, they just did that with Peyton Royce, and we see how well that works.
Exactly, that was a bit
Lacey
foolish,
Evans and stuff like that. I mean, yeah, I'd love to see the Iconics back. I'd love to see the Iconics back in NXT. I'd love to see just Peyton Royce. I'd love to see any woman on the main roster right now that never had a legitimate crack at the NXT Women's title come back at some point.
Yeah.
I used to single out Alexa Bliss and Sonya Deville and Nikki Cross, but it's the more they take them up in bulk, the more those examples are going to come up. Because it's not the same as the men. Because like with the men, even if they weren't a men's like main NXT champion, maybe they were the North American champion, maybe they got a chance to be half of a tag team, maybe whatever. But there's one women's title in NXT, and if you go up, you're probably not coming back down to get it. Not everybody's going to be. I mean, people are going to gasp when I say this. Not everybody's going to get the same shot to go backwards as somebody like a Charlotte Flair or a Finn Balor does.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's probably another conversation to be had in there is like who we'd like to come back, but that will have to go for another night. Raquel Gonzalez sort of wraps up round one of this breakdown of the NXT women's division. I'm really glad we're finally getting a chance to do this.
I am as well, and I can't wait to get into part two. I mean, I don't know if you want to announce and say who's in the second part that we'll be covering.
I'm going to sort of let it float. We did leave out two people from this, and it was virtually because they haven't been on TV enough for us to say anything about them. No slight on Vanessa Bourne, no slight on Chelsea Green. They have been used in minimal fashion. They have been sort of like I said with Xia Li, the other bodies in the ring. I really don't think I would do them any favors by talking about either one of them because there isn't really much to talk about.
Again, I didn't watch Impact, so I know Chelsea Green is, what was her thing, the Laurel Van Ness, or...
Wasn't she like the crazy bride?
Yeah, the crazy
like
jilted lover that had the lipstick smeared all over her face, and she was a really great actress with that stuff. For some of the clips I saw, like she took something that should, in every right, be cringy and stupid, and she turned it into something pretty funny and entertaining. So
yeah, I mean, you mentioned Impact. I'm gonna throw it out there really, really briefly. If we're making like fantasy picks. We talked about Thunder Rosa just recently. We're going to do a video somewhere later on down the line about women that we could save from AEW. That'll be a separate pod on its own. But can you imagine if NXT picked up either Jordynne Grace or Tessa Blanchard?
Yeah, I'm all for her coming to NXT as well.
Okay, we're going to talk about her. I'll give you one spoiler. One of the people we're going to talk about in the next pod is Piper Niven. Can you imagine Piper Niven versus Jordynne Grace?
Oh, I know. That's one.
Or we're talking about larger opponents for Raquel Gonzalez. Tessa Blanchard versus Raquel Gonzalez.
Yeah.
That would do nothing but help Raquel Gonzalez.
That would do gangbusters. I'm telling you right now, that would mark out everybody. No doubt about it.
Jake, you know what I think? I think we can just look at all the guys in NXT and give them the rest of the year off. We've barely scraped the surface of 1/3 of this division. We got 2 more podcasts to go, but I am going to wrap it up because I am tired. I still have to friggin' record AEW shit with Guapo in a little bit. So I'm going to wrap it up. I'm going to throw it over to you. I'm going to throw it over to you because you got to do Joe stuff.
Yeah.
That sounded much worse than I meant it to. For anybody living under a rock.
Live. It doesn't end.
For anybody living under a rock, tell them where to find you.
You can find me on Twitter, Countdown Ended, and I'm the co-host on the Joe Cronin Show. I do all of the after wrestling reviews and podcasts with him over there. Check me out on YouTube as well at Countdown Ended. I do have some new content coming up next week, so there we go. Look forward to that. And thank you so much, Spaz, for having me. I appreciate it greatly, and I can't wait to tackle the other 2 videos with you.
All right, and you guys know where to find me, or you wouldn't be here. I've been Spaz. He's been Super Sexy Jake DeMarco. We are your NXT, in this case, Women's Division Reality Check. Subscribe up there, talk down there, start a conversation. Keep all these conversations going. Don't be a stranger. I'll talk to each and every last one of you later. But for right now, me and Super Sexy Jake DeMarco are tagging out. Bye, guys.